Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Thrivalist Manifesto with Ben V and Dr. G.
What's up, everybody?
All right, so today we're going to be talking about some information that relates to our children, right?
Yes.
And it also applies to ourselves, but we're going to talk about our children and sports.
Yes.
Because, you know, I can tell you right now, I'm in suburban New Jersey where I live, and I got a couple of teenagers that are...
super athletes.
Yeah, right.
They're super athletes.
They're super athletes, and, you know, we see a lot of kids in our practice. We see a lot of teenagers, a lot of people looking to get to the next level from high school and do things athletically that they've never done before, or they're looking to get trying to get to that next level, to be more elite, right?
College is expensive, man.
College is expensive, and every parent wants their scholarship, and I can tell you right now, I kind of wish my kids played
golf.
Some kind of sport that nobody plays. I don't know if they give. I don't know if they give scholarships for curling, but there would be less competition. Let's just put it that way.
That's another podcast we could do. Is just do the research and see what are the oddest scholarships given under the category of athletic scholarships.
Get this. All right, so we all know what Title IX is, right? Title IX is a law that was passed, I think, in the 1970s that says if a school is going to give a scholarship to a male athlete, they have to give a corresponding scholarship to a female athlete. And I was in a class, and I met this young lady who, she was jacked. I mean, she was just really built well. She was clearly an athlete. She was about 24 years old, and she was a CrossFitter.
Okay.
Right? So I said, "Oh, you know, it's great. You look very fit and in shape." She goes, "Yeah, it's what I love to do." I said, "Did you play, a lot of sports in high school and college?" She goes, "No, I didn't play sports she goes, "I was an athlete. I always worked out." And then she had been doing CrossFit and all that stuff for years. But she didn't start playing sports competitively outside of being a kid and playing, baseball and soccer until she went to college. I go, where'd you go to college? She goes, Notre Dame.
Oh, okay.
I'm like, wow, it's an expensive school. She goes, I got a full ride. I'm like, you got a full ride to Notre Dame? Why? She goes, I played rugby.
Nice.
Now get this. She gets a scholarship to play rugby for Notre Dame. She got the scholarship in the springtime. She was going to start in the autumn. She had to go there in the summer, and I guess in July or August to start training with the team. She said after she accepted her scholarship and went there to train was when she played her first game of rugby.
That's amazing.
She was given a scholarship based on her being a good athlete, being fit and all of that, but they were looking for girls to give rugby scholarships to. Right. So now I got a daughter who just does nothing but play one sport. She plays soccer. And if you're a girl trying to get a scholarship for soccer, it's no different than being a boy trying to get a scholarship for football. The most competitive athletes are going to be. So getting that scholarship is going to be very tough.
I've had two Dr. G that were very high level regional soccer players that, they probably could have played on major D1 teams. And because it was so difficult to get a scholarship in soccer, they switched to lacrosse.
Yeah.
And they both, one went to Northwestern and another one went to Fresno State and got a full ride. But they were better soccer players, but they wouldn't have gotten a scholarship for soccer.
Yeah, and I actually have somebody in my town whose niece made it to Division I, not a full ride, but was offered a full ride to Division II.
Okay.
And she chose Division II because in Division I, you basically are told, we suggest you take the easiest courses you can because you basically work for the team. I mean, you you are just training all the time.
Oh, that's another 10 podcasts.
Yeah, and in
the
Division
business
2
of college sports. Yeah.
In Division 2, it's different. In Division 2, she wants to be an engineer, so she can devote more time to her academics. Because look, let's just say you're one of the rare people who goes to Division 1 and you actually become like a professional soccer player. All right, so at some point that's going to end. Right? You're going to be 34 years old. You're going to retire, and then you got your whole life to live, right? So what do you do?
Right.
So this person made a decision to go Division 2, get an engineering degree, and do something, and not have to. And her parents saved probably a couple of $100,000 in money that they would have had to spend in a Division 1 school.
Yeah, and she's got a life after sports.
Exactly.
Yeah. I just heard Joe Rogan's podcast. He had Arian Foster on, who's an ex-NFL running back who was excellent on the podcast. And he was talking about when he was in, I forget where he went to school, but he was obviously in a D1 program and he was on a full ride, and he wanted to study science. And I think he wanted to study like astrophysics or, something of the sort. And he's a very bright guy, and he could have easily done that and was passionate about it and interested in it. And they said, no, you're not going to have time for that. You need to, I think they put him in a philosophy program. So, they want to make sure that that's secondary. And that's important, for people to realize, is that, if you have a smart kid, you have to take that into consideration, because such a such a fraction of college athletes will make it into the pros, no matter what the sport is. And it's important. I don't think the parents get that. And it's a very good segue and a springboard into a article that I wrote that I'll publish on the site or give a link on the site on sports specialization. And it's a big issue that in my career working in athletic preparation and performance rehabilitation, I've seen change exponentially in the last decade. I mean, when we were kids, you played multiple sports. You played baseball in the spring and summer. You played, if you were a football player, you played football in the fall, or you ran track, or you wrestled. And it was usually no less than 2 sports, but it was usually 3 sports, plus recreational activity. At least until you got to a certain point in high school, and then after that you focused maybe on 1 or 2 sports. But now you have parents that are putting all their eggs in one basket with their kids, and they are as young as 5 and 6 years old, playing one sport
year round,
traveling, and playing one sport sometimes 20 hours a week.
So why don't you expand on that a little bit? Tell us more about why specializing, let's just say, in one sport like soccer or basketball, is not a good thing for a young athlete.
Well, there's a couple of components that become problematic. One, and I think the most important one, is it doesn't matter the sport, whether it's soccer or baseball or football. When you're playing one sport year-round like that, or you're focused on one sport exclusively for a certain amount of hours more per week. Wow, it just got dark in here. It just got really romantic, Javier. Now the lights went on. Sorry. Anyway, the lights went out for a second there. I was going to hold Dr. G's hand.
I was wondering what was that hand doing on my knee, but it turned out to be mine.
I was waiting for Barry White to come through the speakers. So there's a couple of things that are problematic with the sports specialization that young. And when I say that young, I have to say that there's a lot of science on this, not so much in North America, but a lot of the research was done in the Eastern Bloc countries. So let me back up just a little bit. So the former Soviet Union during the Cold War, we've spoken about it in other podcasts, but they were concerned with they had a huge nationalistic movement, and they could really pound their chests based on, the power of their military globally and also the dominance in sports globally. And because of that, areas like the former Soviet Union and certain other Eastern Bloc countries and Cuba, and China, they spent a ton of money researching everything. And one of the things they looked at was what was the best way to develop athletes, and what they came up with was that the best way to develop athletes physiologically, neurologically, psychologically, socially, was to put them in these sports schools. And these sports schools, basically, you had a certain amount of academics, certain hours a day, and then you had 3 or 4 sports. And I mean, you did gymnastics, you did judo, you did baseball, you did volleyball, you did track and field. And from that point, they progressed and the athletes evolved to a point where they're about going through puberty, let's say 13, 14, 15, where they said, okay, Steve Giannopoulos or Ben Velasquez, you are much better physiologically, socially, psychologically suited for a world-class level in Olympic wrestling or track and field or baseball or soccer, and then it got even more specialized. But one thing they did know was that they had to progress and develop all those systems in many sports prior to the age of 14. So now we circle back to what we're seeing here in North America, and you have this early sports specialization. They're not allowing the athletes to develop as good athletes. That's not the biggest problem. The biggest problem is that there is a huge increase in what the medical community, sports medicine, refers to as overuse injuries. And overuse injuries become exponentially at a higher risk when you specialize in a sport prior to a certain age. So if you're a baseball player and you decide, you know what, little Johnny's a really good pitcher, but he's on a traveling team, he plays on his school teams, he plays year-round basically, and he's a pitcher. He's not throwing any junk, he's just throwing fastballs, but it's the same pattern biomechanically every single time. It's not if little Johnny will injure himself, it's when little Johnny will injure himself, based on just that. So
in addition to the overuse of the joints themselves, just from the repetitive actions of those movements, you're also in those formative years teaching the brain to connect with the body according to that single sport. Now, if you're going to play soccer, basketball, and football, there's clearly different movement patterns that you're going to have to learn to accommodate each sport. And that gives your brain a significant amount of diversity in controlling your different limb joints, right? Your knees, your hips, your elbows, your wrists, everything.
That's a great point.
So yeah, just from a neuro, on a neurological scale, my kids, and I learned the hard way, but the first thing I said to my kids was, look, I said to all 3 of them, you have to pick a team sport and you have to pick an individual sport.
I like that.
And that was, just one of the rules I had when they were young. Now, my son, he wrestled for 7 years and played soccer. And he did play baseball, but not significant, not enough to entrain his brain in those movement patterns. But what happened was he got very good at playing soccer to the point where he was being asked to play on better and better teams, going to state championships and things like that. And now that's it. You want to be on that team. You can't play anything else. So he had to stop wrestling this past year.
How old is your son?
He's 12 years old.
Okay, so even 13, that is a little early, but So you touched on a number of really important topics, and I'll comment on a couple of them and try to stay away from getting too scientific and getting it up to too high a level. So you mentioned the neuromuscular development, basically. So yeah, there's the risk of overuse injuries, mechanical injuries, but there is the lack of neuromuscular development. And the audience should think about it like this. So every athlete, every person has a part in their brain, the cerebellum. And the cerebellum is like the hard drive. And the hard drive is receiving information from everywhere in the body and is processing it and is interpreting it. And when you play a single sport and you follow the same movement patterns, then you limit yourself to the amount of information, or rather the amount of software. Let's look at it like applications. The amount of applications that your hard drive, your cerebellum, is capable of processing at once. So you basically limit your ability as an athlete. You limit your development as an athlete because your hard drive has less information. And one of the greatest examples of that is that, we deal with all athletes in our practice, and we're able to compare athletes from different sports, and we talk about it and we joke about it. And one of the things that we joke about is we joke about how swimmers, they're really good athletes, but because they spend so much time in the water without gravity and doing the same patterns, they're basically motor morons. So anything outside of swimming, they don't even look like athletes. But you take a gymnast, or you take a dancer, a high-level dancer, which I consider an athlete, or you take a judo player, a high-level martial artist, and they have a much more developed hard drive with a lot more information. So you teach them anything, and they're better athletes. So there's a lot of ramifications of that later on in your everyday life of not having all that information in that hard drive or that cerebellum that we're talking about. And to your second point with your son in particular, the problem is that now the way the systems are set up, you almost have to push them into specializing if you want them to excel at a certain sport, because they have rules. They won't allow you to play another sport. So you almost have to do it on the side or sneak. And there's not a lot of time when you're spending so much of your everyday life every week practicing or competing in one sport in order to be able to play within that high level.
Yeah, I mean, I could tell you right now, there are coaches that will make decisions about cutting a player when they're 9 or 10 years old because they're not making it to every practice because they got basketball practice or they have another sport practice to attend. Mm-hmm. So the pressure is on right from the beginning, and it's a little ridiculous. I want to shift gears a little bit, though, and talk a little bit about your experience as it relates to training kids. And I was fascinated when I saw you working with, young kids, 12, 13, 14 years old, and incorporating some aspects of weightlifting into their routine, and really opened my eyes to the potential that could have, not only to combat sports specialization and prevent injury, but also in performance enhancement. Just talk a little bit about why a 13-year-old girl would lift weights.
Okay, so there was a big lifting weights for young athletes when I was growing up was a no-no. I mean, when I was playing sports, they would make you muscle bound. That was the phrase that they would use, and it was just based on myth. It wasn't based on science. And so I think weight training is a tool within sports science that I love and I use with all my athletes. And I think before I kind of answer your question, we need to back up a little bit and from a sports science standpoint, understand that it's spilled over into adolescent sports now. But when we talk about athletic preparation is primarily science sprinkled with art and experience. And it's very important to know that whoever is coaching your kids, whoever is doing the strength and conditioning for your kids, primarily it has to be based on science. And then with the experience of that particular coach with those type of athletes, sprinkled with a lot of art. And when I say art, I mean that's part of experience, but knowing, taking in all the information and processing it and making it specific to that particular athlete. So when I say that, I mean, your question you asked me about weight training and adolescent athletes, in particular Olympic lifting, the first thing is, if you're having someone prepare your kids, they have to test your kids. And it's not one size fits all. At a minimum, they have to be putting your kids in groups. When I worked with a lot of younger hockey teams, we would test them. And when I mean test them, I mean that for that particular sport, let's use soccer because you and I are both familiar with that sport. You're looking at soccer players. So when I test the soccer players, I'm going to test qualities. So when I say qualities, I mean, okay, what qualities are important to that sport? All right, you have to have a certain amount of VO2 max or aerobic base, let's call it. You have to have a certain amount of power. You have to have a certain amount of mobility. You have to have a certain amount of strength. We look at 4 qualities. I may look at 6 or 7, but those are 4 basic qualities. We're looking at the energy system that's required for that sport. We're looking at the biomechanics involved in that sport and the mobility and strength involved within those biomechanics. And then we break it down further into positions. But we test those qualities first, and we see where that particular athlete lies within what we call normative data for that age. So if I'm looking at a 15-year-old female soccer player that's on a national level, there's norms now for that. So there's norms for what should the VO2 max be, what should their anaerobic power be based on the vertical jump, what should their anaerobic endurance be, or their speed strength be, or their speed endurance, etc., etc., etc. And I pick a few tests that are more pertinent to that particular age group and that sport, and I might do 3 or 4 tests. Now I have data for those individual athletes, for those positions. Based on that data, then I go, oh, you know what? Little Susie, she's got a great VO2 max. She's got a decent speed in the 30s. She's got okay speed endurance. She's got really bad power. Based on her norms. So based on those norms, for other 14-year-old girls, she is kind of below that. So her program, she has to be put in this group where she has to work on power. So it can't be random, it can't be objective, it can't be cookie cutter. It has to be as specific as, that particular situation allows you to be. So why would I incorporate Olympic weightlifting? When I think that after I test, based on what I see, and I'll also look at video, and I'll also interview or do a needs analysis on the athlete, which I can talk about a little bit more in depth, I think that little Susie needs more power. So I want to develop her power with the best tool that I have possible. So for me, that's going to be explosive lifts like Olympic lifts, jumps, rows, and I'll incorporate those into her strength and conditioning program, and then we will retest to see if there was a significant increase in that quality that was lower than everything else. That's how we build a program for her. I like the Olympic lifts because of 2 reasons. One, in the development of the athlete, I am developing a lot of qualities at once, not just power. So I am teaching that young athlete, little Susie, how to accept ground force or kinetic energy, communicate ground force through from the bottom of her foot to the end of the bar, coordinate that while dealing with the forces of gravity that are going to increase exponentially based on how much load she has on the bar. So there's a lot of stuff that I'm working on at once. Why is that important? That's important because that's going to have a functional transfer. You hear the word functional a lot in sports, but that's going to have a transfer to those same qualities that she's going to need on the soccer field. Whereas I can take her and put her in a leg press, and I will not develop any of those qualities because there is no functional transfer from her being in that position, pushing a weight, no matter how heavy, in a linear plane to getting on the soccer field.
Okay, so if I get this right, we're looking with the Olympic lift. You're getting all the things you mentioned about communicating ground force, accepting ground force, but at the same time, you're putting these joints through. You're going to stress their flexibility. Mm-hmm. You're going to be looking at speed. You're going to be looking at strength.
Correct.
You're going to be looking at energy production. All of those things which you would never get from a linear movement like a leg press or a bench press or
leg extension
like that. Exactly.
Yeah, and we're assuming the audience knows what that is. Most people do now.
Yeah. So just making a muscle bigger doesn't make it more athletically. It doesn't contribute to your athletic ability.
Well, that's a good point, Dr. G, because most people will be like, yeah, but I do the leg press and I've gotten stronger and I feel better. Yes. Again, every piece of equipment that's in your facility, I don't care if you train at the local Y or you train at a really like an incredible school facility or college facility or pro facility, every piece of equipment is a tool. And I have no problem with all of those tools, but why are you using that tool and how does that make you a better athlete? Remember, we're talking about athletes, adolescent athletes. We're not talking about bodybuilding. We're not talking about fitness. We're not talking about wellness. That's different. Yeah, I love the leg press or the leg extension for Mr. and Mrs. Smith. But if I get an athlete and I have a limited amount of time, I have to use the tool that's going to allow me to improve the qualities and have the greatest functional transfer to them on the field as possible.
So Ben, talk a little bit also about how you use different forms of tumbling as well. I've seen you use tumbling in your facility where you have the athlete kind of go through a series of steps, tumbling and jumping up onto a platform in a specific sequence.
So tumbling, which is, it's underneath that gymnastics umbrella. I've been researching that quite a bit now in my practice with regards to the work that I'm doing with athletes in the concussion rehab. And so I've just learned that for every athlete, that I'm working with, I'm going to try to incorporate some of that within their program at a certain point, no matter what, for the reason that we spoke about earlier, which was that hard drive. So what happens when you do certain gymnastic movements is that you are sending an enormous amount of information to the cerebellum, to that hard drive, as to where you are in space. So it's enormous amount of global proprioception or information at a very high speed that has a huge transfer to every sport, because the better the athlete is in 360 degrees, the better that they're going to perform in their particular sport, in their position, because they have a more advanced, or they have a hard drive with a lot more software.
What's interesting about that for the young athlete, of course, it makes perfect sense when you go through these gymnastics types of moves where you're tumbling, you're activating this part of your brain we call the vestibular system that kind of tells you where you are in space, and that efficiency is really important for an athlete. So just that spinning phenomenon, that you would get rolling or tumbling. Mm-hmm. But I couldn't help but think, man, I'm going to be 47 this year. Mm-hmm. I should probably be doing some of that, because I don't remember the last time I challenged my vestibular system to that degree. Mm-hmm. And when you're a kid, you're always tumbling and falling and playing and climbing fences. I remember, just growing up in Queens, I mean, you got into trouble and the way you outran the security guard or the police officer or whoever was chasing you was to run through backyards, hop fences, and go through this kind of tumbling and gymnastics kind of movements. And I did that all through my youth. But if I look at the last 20 years of my life or 25 years of my life, what have I really been doing to challenge that part of my nervous system? The answer is very little.
Yeah, it's, part of it is just life. Life gets in the way because what you're talking about is not a structured exercise program for you, which you do already. You're talking about playing. Yeah. That's what we're talking about, is playing. And that's, a great example of that is, again, I keep bringing it up because I listen to his podcast a lot, but I was listening to Joe Rogan, and he made a point. They're always talking about martial arts and MMA, and so he made a point of a particular school that he goes to for jiu-jitsu in California, and he says, man, I couldn't fucking believe it, but he goes, I've never seen a group of young athletes advance through jiu-jitsu as quick as these guys advanced. And so the person he was speaking to was like, well, who was the group? And he goes, it was a group from Northern California, and they were breakdancers. Yeah. And they came in and wanted to learn jiu-jitsu, and I've never seen jiu-jitsu is fucking chess, right? Yeah. It's chess. It's mental and physical chess. And basically it takes a while, like all martial arts, but it takes diligence, it takes practice, it takes experience to progress through the different levels and advance through the different levels. And he's like, I've never seen a group. And I don't think in the podcast they made the connection, but for me, the connection was crystal clear. It was that those breakdancers had more developed hard drives. Their cerebellum, I mean, if you can spin on your head at that speed or do those windmills that they do and know where you are and stop on a dime and control yourself like they control themselves and go from one transition to the next, to the next, to the next, then jiu-jitsu is like, learning jiu-jitsu is like checkers, I don't mean to lower the standard of it, but I'm just saying that just the amount of requirement neurologically for them. And it's important to know how important it is for your adolescent kids to be able to play within those parameters.
Yeah, I mean, something tells me I know what you were doing in 1985 in the South Bronx.
Yeah, put the music on. Put the music on right now.
But the level of proprioception that requires to do those windmills, like you said, and spinning on your head, and I mean, it is truly remarkable. So it makes perfect sense.
Yeah.
So just to kind of bring this full circle, bring this conversation full circle. I think what we're getting out of this is sports specialization is probably not a good idea.
Not until puberty.
The days of the 3-letter athlete are dwindling, and that would probably protect your young athlete very much. Also, it's probably a good idea when you're interviewing who your strength and conditioning coach is going to be for your child, that be somebody with some experience who's going to have specific goals for your child. And parameters to measure that you'd want to see improve, and there should be a rationale behind it, not just lift these weights because it's a good idea, but
there should be a plan that's well thought out, that has a beginning and an end, and they should convince the parent that they've got the particular plan not just for the entire team but for their child, based on their sport and their abilities.
And then if we could just take a second and talk to the idea that, for the older weekend warriors, the executives who are looking to get fitter, the people who are looking to age, physically, in their late 40s and 50s and 60s, can these things be applied to them as well, where you can kind of restore some of those neurological patterns that you had in your youth?
Yeah, I think they can. I think that, there's parts of the country where you're seeing a big movement towards whether it be in groups or individually.
You know that? I'm sorry. That reminds me. I just picked up Tim Ferriss's book, Tools for Titans, and I'm just flipping through it the way he wrote it.
Yeah.
You could just read 3-4 pages at a time, and you can flip anywhere. But he's actually talking quite a bit about these adult gymnastics exercise programs that he's been involved in. I don't know. I'll talk a little bit more about it the next time, but I know he's been talking about it, and I think he attributes his gymnastics training in recent years to his improved performance.
Oh yeah, I mean, and there's tons of research out there. I don't know about for older adults, but definitely for younger adults on the correlation between, again, this is the Thrivalist Manifesto, right? So there's a huge correlation between athletic performance as measured by certain drills like gymnastic, qualities and outside of athletic performance, so cognitive performance. So if you go back to your CEO that wants to perform in the office, there's some value to getting out there and getting good instruction and doing some of these, participating in some of these activities that kind of take you out of, a structured exercise program, or, the typical, I'm going to jump on the elliptical for 30 minutes because it's good for my heart. Yeah. And that's important. I mean, we're like laughing about it, but the truth of the matter is that I travel a lot, and I can't tell you how many hotel gyms that I've trained in. And, what do you see? You see 10 elliptical machines, 4 treadmills, 3 bikes, right, a little section of dumbbells. I mean, I understand some of that is for liability, but nothing else.
Right, but here, for the CEO, I mean, if you have a team and creativity is important and staying on top of your game is important, then it's wise in your physical fitness program to have these novel activities that require your nervous system to get engaged, because it changes your state. Yeah. And state changes are achieved through diet, they're achieved through fasting, they're achieved through meditation, they're achieved through exercise, they're achieved through sex. There's all kinds of
and they're all
ways
tied in.
Absolutely.
And they're all tied in.
Changing your state is absolutely an integral part of being able to see the next steps in front of you for yourself, for your company. So we definitely promote those qualities in a fitness program. And you know what? Teaming up with people and changing things around and not getting stuck in the same rut where you do the same 30-minute routine, for years, because then your body is not learning, your nervous system isn't engaged. And I think we live in a world that requires more and more creativity in our daily routine, regardless of what you do for a living. Oh,
no question about it. I mean, if you're, you're limited for time, that's when you really have to focus on what's the quality of your training regimen, your workout routine. How much am I getting out of that 30, 35 minutes or 40, 45 minutes out of it? Am I saying that don't spend 35 minutes working on the elliptical if that's all you have? No, I think it's valuable, but I think that you need to explore how to better utilize that 35 minutes if that's all you have, to be able to challenge these different systems that work together that are going to give you more bang for the buck. I like to define it, I get the question, what should I do? I like to define it as dumb and smart. And again, I'm not being critical of, certain exercise equipment. I think they're all valuable tools, but if given the choice, you just think about it this way. I can walk into a hotel gym or a regular gym here in New York, and I'll see somebody on the elliptical and they have the music on, the TV on, and they're reading their phone. And you can do that while you're on the elliptical. and you move.
You can multitask.
You can multitask because your brain is not really getting challenged. Your proprioceptive system, your cerebellum, is not really getting any new information. It's just a simple
your heart
pattern.
and your lungs are doing what they do.
Oh, yeah.
You're pumping your blood, and that's beneficial.
It's beneficial,
Right.
but yeah, okay. So, and another important point is that they may be measuring their power output, and the power output, let's call it for the sake of arguments, they're at 150 watts, okay? Or 100 watts, okay? Perfectly doable by everyone. And so now you move over to the bike, and you can do a little bit less on the bike at that 100 watts. Same power output. Now you move over to the treadmill. You can't read on the treadmill. You might be able to watch TV, you might be able to listen to something if you're got pretty decent motor skills, but that's about it. Listen to music, okay? Same power output, 100 watts, okay? Now you have a guy next to you that's skipping rope. Same power output. Can't do anything else. Can't do another thing. So
There is no multitasking.
yeah,
when your
you
nervous
can't.
system is
Same
engaged.
exact power output, but the proprioceptive input to the hard drive, to the cerebellum, the neurological demand, the metabolic demand at the same exact output is exponentially higher. So you're getting more bang for your buck doing 15 minutes of skipping rope versus 15 minutes on the elliptical. It holds the same for exercise. If I'm doing Olympic lifts, same exact power output, but it's exponentially more neurologically demanding. If I'm doing tumbling drills, same power output, maybe a lot less. If all I'm doing is forward rolls or cartwheels but exponentially more demand and more information to that hard drive. It's the same thing. You're starting to see a little bit of a movement, not so much in adults, but more in young athletes towards movement. You see it, Conor McGregor does a lot of movement with Ido Portal, and I think all of that stuff is wonderful. And people think, oh yeah, it's good for mobility. Yeah, it's good for mobility, but he is inputting so much information into that cerebellum that when it comes fight time, he's going to react a lot quicker, autonomically, without thinking about it, than the next guy.
On that note, let's wrap this up. Maybe we should come up with a list of dumb and smart
We can do that on the
exercises
notes.
and put that on the show notes for you.
Absolutely.
So we want to thank you for listening to another episode of the Thrivalist Manifesto with Ben G and Ben V and Dr. G.
Ben G. Yeah,
Ben V and Dr. G.
That's my Friday name. Yeah, thank you guys. Thanks for listening, and go out there and skip rope and jump around and
Tumble.
get back and tumble.
Be well.